to Insignia's special webinar on critical crisis insights for coronavirus planning. We've got a vast array of organisations on the line. We've got representatives from retail, automotive, the care sector, professional services, housing, tech, mining, aviation, charities, public sector, banking, entertainment, and many more. And I think that signifies that right across the economy and across society as a whole, everybody is grappling with what to do in response to the coronavirus epidemic. In today's 1-hour webinar, I'm going to try and give you some practical advice, tips and guidance to help you respond to what we are all currently facing. Firstly, a very quick introduction to myself. My name is Jonathan Hemus. I am the Managing Director and founder of Insignia. Insignia is a specialist crisis management consultancy, and we work with leaders of organisations around the world to help them do and say the right things on the worst days of their business careers through crisis management planning, training and exercising. And it is clear that the situation that we're all facing at the moment certainly is bringing a number of the worst days in a number of careers. And so I think clearly by the interest in this webinar, this is a very well-timed discussion. So what are we going to cover? So we have 1 hour, and so I'm going to crack through the content, hopefully clearly, but also quickly. I want to talk about the role of leaders. There are a number of leaders on this call, and for those of you who even perhaps wouldn't characterize yourself as leaders of your organization, then your influence over those that are is important, and I want to just touch on the role of leadership. Secondly, to set out some of the foundations for your response. The heart of the webinar is about planning. Some of you will have your coronavirus plans almost complete. Others will be midway through them. Maybe there are one or two who helpful guidance on how to make that really purposeful. I want to talk about the additional support that we at Insignia can provide, and I'd love to have time to take questions and answers. So if you have questions, please pose them via the chat pane on your screen. We will deal with them all at the end of the session. So please post those as we go through, and we'll get through as many of them as we possibly can at the end of the session. So, as I said, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the role of leaders in a situation like this. I guess the eyes of your stakeholders, and particularly the eyes of your employees, will be looking at you in a crisis, and certainly in this situation. And it's a real opportunity for you to build their trust. There'll be people who are uncertain, who are fearful, and as leaders, it is our role to guide them into the future and give them that confidence and give them that support that they need at this very challenging moment in time. So leadership is going to be crucial. So moving on to the foundations of your response. What is going to be fundamental to succeeding in the current environment? So the first thing to say is many of you already have crisis management capability. I think by any stretch of the imagination, what we are facing now is a crisis. So please don't forget to deploy that capability that you've spent years putting into place. Don't forget about all of the great resources and great capability that you already have at your disposal. And that's people and that's plans. On the people side, I would suggest that now strongly suggest that now, if you haven't already done so, is the time to activate your crisis management team. Make sure though that as this situation develops and is likely to get worse, you take the time now to remind the members of your crisis management team as to what their roles and responsibilities are, and to remind them of what the plan dictates and how it is to be deployed. So you have a window of opportunity now to brief and maybe even train members of your crisis management team. And don't forget, administrators and those that support the senior team, make sure that you spend this time now ensuring that they are right ready to deploy that plan. And of course, don't forget about involving deputies in that process. Clearly, we know that large numbers of people are not going to be available, so this is absolutely the time for making sure that all of your deputies to the chosen crisis management team members are also briefed and are also available to step in when some of the people you expected to be in that crisis management team are no longer available. Use your plans. When we're working with clients, sadly, it's often the case that in the early stages of a crisis, teams easily forget to use the plans that they have at their disposal. The pressure, the uncertainty, the stress of a crisis means that you don't always do the logical things. So dust off, if they've gathered dust, the plans that you have within your organization that can help you at this time. Your crisis management plan, your business impact analysis, your business continuity plan, and you may have a pandemic plan which is bang up to date, or you may have a pandemic plan which relates back to 10 years ago when there was a previous scare. All of these plans should be useful to help guiding your response now. So don't forget about the capability and the collateral that you already have at your disposal, because what was a good crisis management plan to cover any crisis will be a good and effective crisis management plan to cover what we are facing now with coronavirus. Second bit of the foundations is adopting the right mindset. The previous slide was about, you know, the practical stuff. Mindset is really important as well. Beware denial. It may be that things are going to get really bad. Avoid taking action because you don't like what the facts are telling you or can't countenance the situation getting significantly worse. Managing a crisis is about considering the worst case, preparing for it, and if necessary, scaling back from that. But please do beware denial or an unwillingness to confront the reality of the situation. This is a webinar about planning. The time to plan is now. You probably have 5 to 10 days in which to pull together your plans, maybe less, maybe a little bit more, but we are still just about, in most countries, in the calm before the storm. So use that relative calm to get your planning done. So focus on it right now. And I know many of you are talking to lots of clients. I know it is top of the list of priorities right now. Use your plans, mention that on the first slide, but make sure that the good work that's been done in peacetime is deployed now. Also apply your learnings from training and exercising. Many of you will have run training sessions and in particular exercises. Dust off the feedback reports from those exercises and make sure that the actions that were captured as a result of those exercises have been implemented, that resources that you said that you would need in the event of a major crisis are now in place. Again, you probably have a week to make sure that what you said you needed and the changes you needed to make to your plan. Come on to mindset specifically. Stay calm. Easier said than done, but by definition, the people on this webinar are those that have some responsibility, in some cases a lot of responsibility, for managing the current crisis. Maelstrom of panic, and concern and uncertainty that is washing around us at the moment. So please do stay calm. Focus and prioritise. The characteristics of a crisis are that it is a time of uncertainty, it's a time of pressure, it's an awful lot at stake. All of those factors also apply to this situation. So therefore you need to prioritise and focus on what's most important. I think someone may have somehow been able to come off mute. So if anyone is off mute, if they could please re-mute themselves. I'm just hearing a little bit of background noise. Many thanks. And work purposefully. Make sure that you are making progress in the quickest, most appropriate, most structured way. Coming back briefly to leadership, lead with confidence and humility. Confidence, because that's what your stakeholders and in particular your employees will be looking for. They need confidence and hope for the future. And humility, this is absolutely a situation whereby it's not founded upon your commercial business interests, it's founded upon the impact of this situation on third parties. And do please operate in accordance with your values. This is a time when what you've told the world you are, what you've said your values are, they need to be exemplified by your response to this situation. Again, I am just hearing a little bit of background noise. Catherine, could I ask you to just see if we can get that muted, please? And if it is anyone on the line who can do it themselves, please could you mute yourself, or alternatively try to avoid any background noise. Thank you very much. So that's the background, that's the foundations and the framework. Let's move on to purposeful planning. I want to introduce you to 6 questions that you should be asking yourselves right now and using to shape your coronavirus response plan. The 6 questions are: what is the impact of COVID-19 on our business? What is our strategic intent? What activities must we focus on to achieve our strategic intent? Of these activities, which is our top priority right now? What resources do we need to implement these activities? And who needs to know what, when, and how? Okay, I think I was muted for a minute. I'm not sure if you got all of that. Hopefully I am now unmuted, but everyone else is muted. So the 6 questions: the impact of COVID-19 on your business, your strategic intent, the activities you must focus on to achieve your strategic intent, your top priority right now, the resources you need, and who needs to know what, when, and how. And I will go through those one by one. So, first of all, the impact of COVID-19 on your business or your organisation. Clearly, every organisation is slightly different, and so you need to understand the precise impact on you and your business. So, risk assessment. Identify for your organisation what are the specific risks caused by COVID-19 to your people, your operations, your reputation, your finances, and your relationships. Prioritize those risks in terms of their likelihood, how likely is this risk to occur, and their impact, how big would the impact be if this risk came to pass. And then understand and plan for your critical vulnerabilities, and that's what we'll be coming on to talk about next. So, when we talk about impact, you also need to scenario plan the impact of forthcoming official advice and instruction. We can see the direction of travel. The guidance is different in different countries, as we know only too well. but for every organisation in whichever country you are based, spend some time scenario planning what might the authorities tell us to do next, and map those instructions against the impact on you and therefore what you need to do as a result. Think about the impact as it relates to stakeholder behaviour. Think about how your customer and client behaviour is changing as a result of COVID-19 and what you might need to do as a result. Think about how your supplier behaviour is changing. Are they able to supply you with the goods that they normally do? And in this, challenging time for many businesses, what happens if a key supplier isn't there at all? And then more broadly, think about the expectations of your other stakeholders. And we'll come on to communication towards the end of this webinar, but run through your stakeholders and understand how changing stakeholder behaviour, whether suppliers, customers, or other stakeholders, what the impact of that change behaviour would be on you and your organisation. Now, the impact of people. On this slide, I am primarily thinking about your own people, your employees, but you can think about this more broadly too. As I mentioned earlier on, it's important and beneficial to scenario plan against the worst case, not your best hope. So you need to think about infection rates and fatality rates, but frankly, for businesses, when we're looking at business impact, the critical rate that you need to be looking at is absence rates, because clearly it's not just people who are ill, there will also be the people who are caring for those who are ill or quarantined. So I would suggest as a minimum, you need to be planning, how do we operate without 30% of our workforce for up to a month? And even that number might be an underestimate. So please do plan for the worst case. Again, if everybody could just make sure that they are on mute, I'd be really grateful. Couple of key areas to think about. And this kind of comes back to your business impact analysis, your business continuity planning. Do you have a group of critical skills workers? In other words, a smallish group of people, and they are the only people who can do a specific task. For example, those who have to have security clearance to do a particular job. Those are people that you really need to think about how would you cover for, or how will you cover for, when a number of them aren't available. Also think about what we've called super spreaders. There will be people within your organisation who, through their role, will just naturally come into contact with hundreds or thousands of other members of your team. Canteen staff, if you have a canteen, being a good example. And when you've identified those groups, frankly, you want to find alternative ways of delivering the services that they currently offer to avoid a higher risk of hundreds or thousands of other members of staff being infected. And I'm talking about even if we don't know that individuals are infected, for an abundance of care and also to protect your business and its people. For example, if we take the canteen as an example, you may want to shut the canteen for a month and organise for sandwiches to be provided, or vending machines to be installed within the business. So think about who your super spreaders might be. Then think about impact on your business capability. Let's say you did only have 70%. Work on 50% if you want to look at an even worst case. With only 70% of your workforce available, determine beforehand what are our critical functions, services and activities, and what can we forego for a month or more. Now, for those of you that have a full business continuity plan, you absolutely should have the fundamentals of that information already. For those of you that don't, now is the time to work out the answers to those questions. you will not be able to do everything that you normally do. So work out and be very clear and determine and agree what are the parts of the business that must continue operating. And beforehand, determine the triggers that mean you will switch from working as business as usual to only delivering those core activities, the critical functions that you have defined as being essential. Okay, so that is all assessing the impact. That's the first stage of your planning process. The second stage is defining your strategic intent. And for the Insignia clients, you'll know that this is a concept that we talk about a lot. It's also something that sometimes organizations fail to do in a crisis. I would strongly recommend you set your strategic intent at an early stage of your COVID-19 planning. What is strategic intent? It is an articulation of, when we get to the end of this, what do we want to have achieved? Where do we want to be? And by defining that, you can use your strategic intent to guide decision-making and prioritization during the crisis. And it's critical that your strategic intent aligns with your values. So I suggest you project yourself forward, let's say 6 months to October, and say, in October, where do we want to be? What do we want to have achieved? And here are a couple of real examples of strategic intent that organizations have committed to right now. The first one is to care for our people in order to sustain business as usual for as long as possible, and then, if needed, focus on previously agreed core activities to maintain the trust and confidence of our stakeholders. Second one for another organization is to take operational steps to emerge from the current situation as quickly and strongly as possible, whilst remaining true to our values and without jeopardizing our long-term vision. So determine the strategic intent for your organization. Having defined your strategic intent, you now need to determine, what do we need to do? What activities do we need to undertake to achieve that strategic intent? So here are the questions that you should ask yourself. What activities must we focus on to achieve our strategic intent? What do we need to do? What decisions must we take? Again, we know that any crisis demands difficult decisions. So here are a couple of tips as you seek to make challenging decisions during the coronavirus outbreak. Firstly, make sure they are timely. In other words, make sure you make decisions quickly enough. One of the ways that you can do that is by some of the activity we've talked about already, and some of the activity we'll talk about in a few minutes. But if you've done your scenario planning and worked out what your triggers are for changing from business as usual to the kind of new normal, you can pre-plan and pre-agree those decisions that will just be taken as a result of a trigger that you have predetermined. The second thing is a little bit less in terms of a process, more about the way that people need to rise to the challenge. Now is the time when leaders need to lead. None of these decisions are going to be easy, but people need to take responsibility within your organizations. And I think that's important because sadly, we don't always trust our politicians, our governments who are giving us guidance. Actually, this is an opportunity for leaders of businesses and organizations to step forward and, you know, retain and earn greater trust from the people working for them, to give them the comfort, guidance and support that they need. So take responsibility for decision making and simply make the best decisions you can with the information you have available at that time. We all know this is an incredibly dynamic situation. You can only make the best decisions you can with the information available. Do not wait, do not delay, because tomorrow will be different to today. But if you don't take actions and decisions today, you are simply going to be in reactive mode throughout this situation. Talking about this being a dynamic situation, that will require you as leaders and managers to be adaptive, flexible, nimble, agile, open-minded. We need to have the blinkers off, and we need to be prepared to be agile, nimble, flexible. We need to pivot from one way of working to another, depending on what happens tomorrow or on the day after. And don't be shy or worried about re-evaluating and changing tactics in a dynamic crisis like this. That's to be expected, and that's what you have to become comfortable with. Prioritization. So prioritization of those actions and activities. In a crisis, you will not have enough time or resource to do everything you would like to do as soon as you would like to do it. And in a situation whereby you may have 20, 30, 40% of your workforce missing, you certainly won't have the resource to do everything you would like to do. Therefore, you must prioritize. And at each stage of the crisis, determine what is our top priority or main effort right now. What is the most important area we need to be focusing on now? Predetermine, think through, when will that change and why would it change? This again is about predetermining triggers and thresholds that mean we've moved from one phase to another. And by predetermining those triggers, again, you are enabling better, more objective and more timely decision making. So you must prioritize. What is the most important? That prioritization of your activities and actions must be taken at a senior strategic leadership level. That needs to be determined at the very top of the organization. And by determining that, it enables the whole organization to focus their actions and resources to support this main effort. So everybody is focusing on driving forward the most important thing at that particular time. Once that's determined, you can brief your team so that everybody knows what our top priority right now is and can be acting against it. That is much better than a whole multitude of teams having a multitude of perceptions around what the top priority is, all making different decisions, and your effort being dissipated right across the organization. Here is an example of one organization right now. This is their top priority. Our top priority right now is to ensure our crisis management capability, people and plans, are ready to go and sustainable for up to 3 months. So at the moment, this is not to say they're not doing anything else, but the most important thing they're doing right now is making sure they have the people and the plans to manage this crisis as ready and as effective as they possibly can be, and in a state which can sustain them for up to 3 months. So work out your own top priority on the basis of your own strategic intent. What resources do you need to implement your activities? I'm going to go through this section quite quickly. Basically, based on the activities and actions that you have defined, you need to work out how are we going to implement those activities, who is going to do it, and how are we going to account for the fact that, again, sadly, we may be without a third or more of our workforce that we would normally have in place. Final area of planning is who needs to know what and when. And as we move into this final area of planning at just gone 1/2 the hour, if you do have questions, please continue to post those, and we'll try and deal with a number of those in the second half of the webinar. So, who needs to know what and when? In all communication, but particularly in a crisis, it's really important to understand the context in which you are communicating. It's about, I've used the phrase here, it's about putting yourself in the shoes of your stakeholders. So ask yourselves, what expectations do your stakeholders have of you? What would your stakeholders expect you to do and say in this situation? What do your values dictate? I make no apology for talking about values again at this point. This is, if you want to look at it this way, this is an opportunity to reinforce the values of your organization. It's also a real threat in the sense that if you don't operate in a way that reflects your values, that may cause people to question whether those values are real or not, with significant impact on your reputation and your business. So as you seek to understand the context in which you're communicating, put yourself in the shoes of your stakeholders. They are feeling uncertain, fearful, and they have heightened anxiety and emotions. A number of you, me, feeling some of those emotions. So we have a lot more information as managers and leaders within our business than many others who are within our business. So if we feel anxious and uncertain, imagine how those feel that don't have the level of information or knowledge that we do about what our organization is doing about it. So be very mindful of the people that you're communicating with and how they may be feeling. I do want to talk specifically about employees. I want you to plan for all of your stakeholders, but clearly your employees, particularly in this situation, are a really important stakeholder group. And in any crisis, employees are asking themselves two questions of their leaders. Are they competent and do they care? In other words, this organization right now is facing a serious challenge. Does our leadership team have the competence and the capability to guide us through this enormously challenging situation into a new future? And then, you know, in brackets, because if they don't, I'm not going to have a job. Secondly, they will be asking, do they care? At a time when I am personally affected, my family is personally affected, I've been told over the last 10 years at this business that employees are our #1 priority. Are these guys really going to prove that they care about us? And are their actions going to meet with their words? So be very aware that those two questions are going round the heads of your employees at this time, and be prepared in your communication to address those questions. If we talk about messaging, I would recommend that messaging for communication should all cover these three areas. It should inform, it should provide facts and clear information about what's going on. And I'll come back to clear and accurate information, but that's clearly going to be an important part of your messaging. Secondly, reassurance. There has to be empathy, concern, reassurance as part of the messaging in any communication. And thirdly, guidance or action, what you need to do. So these are the facts. This is how I can reassure you. And there's a limit to which you can reassure people, clearly. Thirdly, this is what I need you to do as a result. This is what we are doing as a result. So all communication, I would suggest, need to reflect those three message themes. For your own planning, rely upon credible information. If ever there was rumour, speculation, conspiracy theories, and almost too much information, coronavirus is it. I would recommend to you that as leadership teams, as managers, you rely upon some really trusted, credible information sources, like the 4 listed at the bottom: World Health Organization, government, obviously depends which country you're in, the NHS, the UK's health service, but you will also have chief medical officers wherever you are based, and the really properly credible media outlets, for example, the BBC. So I think there's a real danger of leaders becoming overwhelmed with information. My advice is, again, filter it down to those which are really credible and really valuable. And by the way, the World Health Organization does have a really comprehensive section of its website all about coronavirus, and it issues a daily update. That, I would suggest, should probably form the centerpiece of your communication. So second thing is, do not reinvent the wheel. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, in terms then of the advice that you give to your people, base it on the best health advice that's already out there. Don't try to create your own super bespoke version of it. You've got limited time, you've got limited knowledge. Make best use of the guidance out there and forward that on to your employees, and indeed guide them to reliable information sources. Probably not some of the more complex stuff, but in the UK, the BBC is a very good resource. The NHS is a very good resource. So direct them to reliable information sources too. I want to talk about some principles for your communication, how you communicate and what you need to do. Communicate transparently. In other words, let's not have spin in this situation. People are grown-ups. Yes, they are worried. Yes, they are fearful, but we need to, in an empathetic way, tell them how it is. So transparently and clearly, you need to retain people's trust. So don't hide things, and certainly don't say anything that is untruthful. Communicate frequently. Only you can be the judge of what frequently means, but when people are in a crisis and when people have, a heightened state of anxiety, they will not receive information as clearly as they normally would. Therefore, you need to communicate your messages much more frequently than you might think is required. So commit to regular, frequent communication and have it running across multiple formats and channels. The fundamental same messages, but sent by email, on a website, on an intranet, face-to-face if that's still possible, but get information to people in different ways and via different channels. This is absolutely also a situation whereby communication should not be one way. It's important that people have the opportunity to ask questions or get additional information. So build that into your communication. Brief the front line. Let's say you have a call center. They need to know what to say to customers who are concerned about getting your product, if you may have supply chain issues, for example. So those employees that are in the front line, you need to give them sufficient information, a Q&A sheet, etc., and to enable them to deal with the queries that they are receiving. And absolutely equip your key department heads, line managers, so that they, on a one-to-one basis, whether it's virtual via phone or face-to-face, give them the materials and the knowledge to be able to brief staff and also to answer staff questions, or at the very least give them information about where to direct staff to get answers to their questions. As you develop specific communication materials, here is a checklist that I'd like you to run through as you sign off that internal briefing or that communication to your customers. Is it human? This is, by its very nature, a human crisis with lives at risk. If you come across all cold and corporate and jargonistic in your communication, it's going to land very badly. So it needs to be written as a person communicating with another person. Is it clear? Is it simple? Is it straightforward? Again, our brains can become scrambled in a crisis. It's not easy for us to take on board detailed, complex information, particularly if it's of a scientific nature. So do everything in your power to make your communication clear, simple, and straightforward. Is it practical? Now is not the time for theory, concepts, or ideas. Does it give people practical advice, practical actions, practical instructions? Is it in line with our values? Third slide on which values have been mentioned. Does this piece of communication align with what we have told the world that this organisation is all about? And are your messages substantiated? In simple terms, what I mean by that is, if you've said, we are taking all steps to protect the health of our employees, you need to be able to substantiate that. What do you mean by we are taking all steps? You need to be able to then provide a list of 3, 5, 10, 50 pieces of evidence or examples that demonstrate that you indeed are taking all steps to protect the health of your employees. Otherwise, it is just a cliche. It's just a piece of wordage that has no substance behind it. Constructing your communication plan. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'm going to talk to you in a few minutes about a workshop we're running where we will go through this in more detail, but it's a whole other session. But in simple terms, how do you develop your communication plan? Set your communication objectives. Again, what are we seeking to achieve with our communication? Identify and prioritize stakeholders. So who are they and who are the most important? Again, it's uncomfortable having to prioritize stakeholders, saying some are more important than others, but in a situation whereby you have insufficient resource, your only chance of success is by prioritizing. Pick out those stakeholders who are either most affected by the situation and or those who have most influence over how you as an organization will emerge from this. Develop messages that inform, reassure and drive action. We were talking about that message formula earlier on. Determine the most appropriate channels. How are we going to get those messages to our stakeholders? Agree timing and triggers for communication. So there are some pieces of communication that you will know we are going to issue that at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The triggers bit is about saying we're going to prepare a piece of communication, but we will only issue it if this happens, and that's about a threshold or a trigger. So it is ready to be deployed, but you won't know when or if you will need to issue it. And do coordinate your communication with key colleagues. If you're actually developing that communication, I know many of you on this call are from the communication function, make sure that your HR and legal colleagues, for example, have been involved in that process and that what they're saying and doing aligns with what you are saying and doing. And mentioned earlier, communication is going to be critical in this situation, but again, if you are one of the people working in a communication department, you will have 1/4 to 1/2 less people than normal. How are you going to get the job done in the absence of 1/4 to 1/3 of your team? As an example of good communication that I think it would be worth 5 minutes of your time to have a look at, and this is primarily customer communication. Delta Airlines has created a very large microsite on its main website, and it is full of information about what Delta Airlines is doing in response to the coronavirus. The first reason I commend them is that they are being very proactive and very prolific in terms of the information that they're putting out there. What they're also doing very well is they are substantiating their messages. They are not talking in generalities. They are explaining specifically how they are keeping people safe. So the image on the bottom left of the screen is a video of the fogging technique, which is a technique that is used to remove any possibility of the virus from within an aircraft cabin. So they're not just saying, you know, we are taking all steps to disinfect aircraft. They are showing you them doing it. They're being very clear and very specific. Check-in kiosks, they are recognizing that people might be fearful that with the new self-check-in, if I touch a screen to check into a flight, someone else may just have touched that screen who has the virus. And what Delta are doing is in very, very clear, simple language, they are explaining how they are addressing that risk. So I know we've got a couple of organisations from the aviation sector on this call, but I believe this is, as a principle, as a way of communicating, there are some really valuable lessons to be learned here. So, in summary, before I come on to the kind of final part of the presentation, and then we will have 10 minutes for questions, here's the structure to ensure that you do plan purposefully. Work out what is the impact of COVID-19 on your business. What is your strategic intent? Where do you want to be by the end of this immediate crisis? What are the key activities you must focus on to achieve your strategic intent? Of these activities, which is your top priority right now? And clearly that right now will change as we move through the situation. What resources do you need to implement these activities? And communication, who needs to know what, when, and how? If you use that as a planning framework, you will end up, I believe, with a very effective response plan to coronavirus. 3 key things that I wanted to emphasize before moving on to other ways in which we can help. I want to say again, the time to act is now. You still have time to plan. In 2 weeks' time, you will be in reactive mode if you haven't done that planning. And the fact you're on this call shows that you recognize that, but please make best use of the time that you have now. Sadly, I would also encourage you, not now, but in a couple of months' time, to plan for the second wave. There is a lot of talk amongst the scientific and medical community, you will have heard it, that there will be a second wave next winter, October, November, December time. That might be a variant of the virus, or it might just be that COVID-19 comes back again. We hope and expect there will be a gap between the peak of this first wave and the second wave. There may be a period of 4 to 6 months when things are not quite as dramatic as they are right now. Please, please, please make best use of that breathing space that I hope and expect we will have later this year. Review, learn and act on experience. In other words, having developed the plan we've just been talking about, having executed it, what went well, what didn't go so well, and therefore what do we need to do now to be even better prepared for when it comes back again next winter. One could maybe be forgiven for not having everything in place for this current first wave, I don't think we can be forgiven if we make the same mistakes a second time round. So based on that experience, refine your plan, train your team and exercise your response in the gap between the first wave and the second wave, so that you are in a much better position to respond if and when this strikes again later in the year. And I think it's important to have some positivity within this situation. Do look at the opportunities out of this crisis. Crisis can create opportunity. For example, no one clearly would have wanted this to have taken place, but we're already seeing phenomenal examples of teamwork, creative new ways of working together, organizations developing new products and services. A crisis can create opportunity. So whilst we would never have wanted this to have happened, look for those opportunities. And again, as we come out of this situation, as of course we will, capitalize on those opportunities and those, you know, maybe more purposeful ways of working, more purposeful ways of planning, more purposeful ways of running meetings, carry those forward into business as usual. I really don't want to make this an advert, but the number of people on this call and the conversations we're having suggest that people are looking for additional support. So briefly, I just wanted to explain what else we can do for you if you would like us to do so. First of all, next week, we are running 2 communication planning virtual workshops lasting 3 hours. They will walk you through the communication planning process in much more detail than I've done in that couple of slides 5 minutes ago, to enable you to emerge from that workshop with almost drafted communication materials, certainly with a very, very clear route map, and also some practical templates and checklists that you can use. As part of that, we will also offer a 1-hour one-to-one call with an Insignia consultant. The virtual workshop will be an open workshop for anyone to join. The 1-hour call will be a one-to-one, which can, you know, perhaps have us take a look at the materials that you've developed, or for you to ask us more detailed questions. Cost of that is £350 plus VAT for the first delegate from an organisation. Additional delegates are at £150 each. There are sessions running next Tuesday afternoon and next Thursday morning UK time, and details of those will be in the follow-up email that you receive after this webinar. Equally, if it's not really a virtual workshop that you're looking for and you want something bespoke straight away, please let us know. We're already running planning workshops, broad planning workshops along the lines that I've described earlier in this webinar, communication planning workshops. We are developing communication materials for clients, so if you would like us to take on some of the workload there, we'd be happy to do so. Likewise, if you're looking for simply for advice, consultancy, additional arms, legs and brains, we will do our best to help. So the offer is there. If you would like help in any of those areas, please do get in touch. You have our details, but I'll leave that on screen for now as I move on to the questions and answers. So we have just 5 minutes. So first question, are there key principles for how we organize ourselves to meet a crisis like this? For example, we don't have a dedicated crisis management team, never have. Okay, so now is the time to create that team for the first time. I guess the principles I would suggest is you need senior leadership in that meeting. Crisis management is a strategic task, and so you need senior management involved as part of that crisis management team. You need functional experts represented, so HR need to be there, legal need to be there, communications need to be there. Ideally, you also want people who are there not because of their seniority or because of their expertise, but also because they play a specific role within the crisis management team. For example, you will need administrators to log the actions and decisions that you have taken. Ideally, you would want a crisis management coordinator, who is the person that is making sure that the team is staying true to the plans and following the agenda for the crisis team meetings. I would encourage you, if you're setting up a crisis management team for the first time, to follow the principles within this webinar, and critically, 2 tips. 1, set strategic intent, and 2, run purposeful meetings. Purposeful meetings which are a balance between a dictatorship from an overbearing leader at one end of the spectrum through to an absolute democracy at the other end of the spectrum. Neither of those work well in a crisis, so it's about a fine balancing line. Second question, to what extent are you seeing medium and large organisations appointing full-time officers and managers to manage the crisis? A small number of organisations have, or a relatively small number of organisations have, a head of crisis management, and they will be dedicated to this task right now. Most organisations, even large organisations, do not have a single person dedicated to crisis management. It's most often someone whose day job is communication or HR or business continuity or risk or legal, who has crisis management as one of their responsibilities. I guess in this situation, yes, there are a number of organisations who are giving ultimate responsibility for this planning process to an individual. That may be, if they have it, it probably is their head of crisis management, but for other organisations it will be whomever is best suited and whomever has the capacity to do so. Again, the critical thing I would say, it's obvious, but I will say it anyway, is if there is one person responsible, one person with a whole lot of knowledge in their head, that clearly is a massive risk in the current situation. So do not allow yourself to be in a position where there is a single point of failure with one person who knows everything and has sole responsibility. Let me see. Do you have an example of a scenario planning workshop? Hopefully, what I've said since that question came in, hopefully I've covered that now. We do have on our website, we've got a on our resources page, and there'll be a link to that in the email that we send out. There is actually a 2-pager, a PDF, which describes how a scenario planning workshop runs. So I think that would probably be the best way of covering that off, Andrew. Final question with 1 minute to go. Would you be able to share with participants of this webinar examples of best practice COVID-19 communication via the website or blog? So this presentation itself will be shared. So, for example, the Delta example is a good one. We are currently working with a number of partners to launch a website which will be a range of expertise and perspective on what's going on coronavirus, and that, Kevin, would probably be the best place for me to direct you to, and that should be going live by the middle of next week, I would hope. We are on the hour. I've taken 60 minutes. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please do drop me a line or call me via the details on this page. We would be delighted to assist anyone that needs help. We would love to help with your communication planning, so please do sign up for the virtual workshops if that is of value to you. If not, please do take on board the learnings from this webinar. I hope it's been valuable, I hope it's been helpful, and I hope it enables you to navigate the current challenging times and emerge out of it with the minimum impact on your stakeholders, your employees, your business and its reputation. Thank you all very much.